How can you trust the Bible when it's been clearly disproved by science? I'm Jeff, and I'm the atheist pastor. I grew up an atheist and became a pastor. I mean, seriously, when you look at the Bible, it starts off saying that the universe was created in 6 days. It says that the whole world was covered by a global flood. It describes miracles that are clearly not scientifically reproducible, most notably Jesus living after he died. And so how can you trust a book that contains things like this that clearly can't be true? When we look through the lens of 20th century science, a lot of these things look foolish, but there are some recent discoveries by science that really open our eyes, that through a 21st century scientific lens, we see that a lot of the things in the Bible are much more plausible than we previously thought. We'll start with how the universe was created. Now, and the source of a lot of misunderstandings, thinking that the Bible was contradictory with science, come from actually a misunderstanding and misinterpretation of the Bible itself. Genesis 1 is a song. It's a song that Hebrews taught their children from the time they were babies, the time they were 2 and 3 years old as toddlers. And they would sing this song to sing about the creation of the universe. That's why this is actually the most ancient document in existence, because it's been passed by oral tradition down for thousands of years and preserved because it's a song with rhythm and meter. And the primary view of Genesis 1 is teaching theological truths, to teach kids about God and who He is, and to teach them the primary truth that He is the creator of all things. Well, this was seen as a ridiculous view, especially by Albert Einstein, that believed the common view of science that the universe was eternal, that it never had a beginning, it's just always existed, until in 1912 when we discovered the redshift. That as we looked at the stars and the galaxies around us, we found they were moving away from us at close to the speed of light. And so the light coming from the stars exhibited a redshift that showed there was movement. And as they tried to explain why this blew the minds of the scientists and the physicists in the early 1900s, they realized the universe was a dynamic universe and not a static universe. And then one physicist, Georges Latimer, came up with a theory. He looked at the data and he noticed they were all coming from one point in space-time. And he proposed a theory that the universe actually had a beginning. That there was a time when the universe did not exist, and one moment in space-time when the universe came into existence. Well, Einstein thought this was the stupidest idea he had ever heard, and he made fun of Latimer, made fun of his theory for years. Well, Latimer wasn't discouraged, and he kept studying this and kept looking at the data, and the more they looked at the data, the more they found, as a matter of fact, they did see one point in space-time where all of the stars and galaxies were coming out from, to the point where even Einstein was convinced and worked with Latimer in the later years of his life to develop what we all know now as the Big Bang Theory. As we went into space, we discovered things like that the temperature of space is exactly 3.7 degrees Kelvin. Why would space have any temperature when it's a void? And why would it be exactly 3.7 degrees Kelvin? When they discovered by accident the science of radio astronomy, we discovered there's a background radiation in the universe. And we launched a satellite, COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer, in 1993 to measure this background radiation. And what we found was the signature of the original Big Bang, evidence from when the initial explosion turned from plasma to gas. And this moment we can measure, and through measuring this moment through the COBE, the Planck, and the WMAP satellites that are in orbit right now, we can measure that there was a moment of creation, and it took a trillionth of a second. And all matter that exists in this massive universe all came from one instant in space-time. And before that instant in space-time, there was nothing. There was no matter. There was no universe. And so how did that come into being? Well, if that came into being through all things that are nature. Well, it had to be something beyond what's nature, which by definition is supernatural. And so our best scientific understanding in the year 2019 as to how the universe came into being is that in one moment in space-time, something outside this universe brought into existence every bit of matter. And so the central teaching of Genesis 1, that the universe came from one moment in space-time created by a supernatural entity, actually is verified by science. Now, what about the flood? I mean, things like this are ridiculous. That there's a worldwide flood and all the animals were in an ark. Well, Florida State University, in partnership with the Smithsonian Institute, in 2014 studied rocks that came from the deepest part of the earth. See, between 200 and 500 miles below the Earth's surface, we found rocks that were shot out of volcanoes that we're able to study because we've never been able to dig this deep into the Earth's crust. And so all of our views of what's inside the Earth are based on theory. Well, in 2014, they discovered these rocks were 1.5% water saturated. Now, this shocked the scientific community because this is the first evidence that there is water, and even significant amounts of water, underneath the Earth's surface. And even if this part of the Earth is only 0.5% water saturated, they just happen to find rocks from a larger point, then that would mean there is enough water under the Earth to come and flood the Earth's surface. And a careful reading of Genesis 7 shows us that actually most of the water came from below the Earth's surface. Now, all it would take is a vein that cuts through to the surface for that water that's under pressure and highly heated to shoot up through the vein and flood the Earth. And then as it covers the Earth's surface, it would have time to cool and it would sink back into the Earth. And so this doesn't prove there was a global flood, but what it does is it shows it's actually not a crazy idea, that it's actually possible. Well, what about all those miracles throughout the Bible? I mean, surely you can't believe all those miracles, can you? Especially because they're not scientifically reproducible. You can't reproduce them in a lab. Of course you can't. You see, the definition of a miracle is it's something that goes outside of scientific laws and things that we know to be true. That's why it's an unusual event. And that's why so many of the miracles are recorded in the Bible, because they're so unusual. So we use a different standard because the scientific method cannot work by definition to determine if a miracle is accurate or not. We use the historic method. And so we look for key things as, does this happen at a real time, in a real place, and real people? See, the difference between a myth, a story that was made up, or real history, is that a myth happens a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away to Han Solo and Princess Leia. Now, I love Star Wars, but it's not true. And the reason you know it's not true is because it doesn't have a real time, a real place, and real people. Now let's look at the most important miracle of all that the Bible describes, and that's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And that took place April 9th, 30 AD, 6 a.m. in Jerusalem, Israel. It was witnessed by real people, and actually hundreds of people, over a period of 40 days. So we know this is different. This is history. And so how can you believe the Bible when it has all kinds of things that were disproved by science? Well, because actually they weren't. That the more we grow in understanding of science and the more we grow in our understanding of the Bible, we're really seeing more and more now that the Bible and science do not contradict each other. You don't have to choose whether you believe in science or you believe in the Bible. That very much, the more you study the Bible, the more that grows your understanding of science, and the more you study science, the more you grow in your appreciation for the Bible. I'm Pastor Jeff. Thanks for your time.